Rockets and Knicks were in Game 5 when O.J. started that fateful drive. His four-way hazard lights were blinking, and no one knew what the juice was thinking.
I've been to Reno, Chicago, Fargo, Minnesota, Buffalo, Toronto, Winslow, Sarasota, Wichita, Tulsa, Ottawa, Oklahoma, Tampa, Panama, Mattawa, La Paloma, Bangor, Baltimore, Salvador, Amarillo, Tocopilla, Barranquilla, and Padilla. I'm a killer. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Crossed the desert bare, man. I breathe the mountain air, man. I've traveled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
This is Oversight Live, your advocate for good governance. We're putting the site back in. Oversight. Here's the watcher on the wall, your host, Ben Carpenter.
Good evening, Alaskans. Welcome to Oversight Live. I am Ben Carpenter, your host. Tonight, as we dive into more along the gasline project, and this is going to be a jam-packed night. Good information coming out of Senate Finance now. Finally, we're getting some good questions and good answers, and there's some questions that I've posed that we'll cover tonight that I think everybody's been asking questions for quite a while. So we're going to get into it. What is Oversight Live? All right. Well, everybody knows here in Alaska that our state capital is down in Juneau, and it's hard to get to. It's expensive because it's so far away. You got to fly or you got to take a ferry. There's no road to get to it. So Oversight Live is your road to Juneau until one can be built. All right. I spent 6 years in the legislature. I have an idea, kind of an understanding of how the place works. Just enough to be dangerous. And there's so much going on usually that it's hard to discern or figure out what it is, what's the important stuff. So I am going to try to pull out the important pieces and bring that to you so that we can educate ourselves and provide better oversight of the people who are representing us in our state legislature and in the government in general. So that's the purpose. If you've got questions, this is the place to ask them. I'll do my best to answer your questions with my experience, and if not, we'll find the answer for you. We're broadcasting on YouTube, Facebook, and X, and if you would chat in the window, ask your question, I'll do my best to answer it right on the spot. If you want to email me a question, you can do that as well. If you're watching the recording, you can't chat with me live, but you can email me. My email address is producer@oversightlive.com. Send your question, send your comments, send your feedback, and I'll do my best to respond to you. If you've got really good questions, we may have a discussion about it on air, because if you've got the question, other people do too. And the whole point of the program is to educate us, edify us, make us better citizens, and be able to provide better oversight of our state government. All right. So that's that. We're going to attempt to have some fun too. All right. Because who wants to sit around and talk about government for an hour or 2 hours every night? I mean, only a few of us. We're going to attempt to have some fun doing it. All right. All right. Yes, DeShane, I heard that Governor Walker may be entering the race or has filed a letter of intent, which is bizarre. Bizarre. Anyway, I don't know what that would bode for the project itself, considering he already took a stab at it a while ago. Anyway, we're not going to go there tonight. All right. Let's see. I am going to, there's a few questions that I've posed that I'm going to tee up here for you. Okay. We have heard Governor Dunleavy talk about $5 gas, and there's been other conversations to say, once the project is done, the state's going to benefit from $5 gas. Okay. How is that even possible? Right. We kind of danced around that question last night, and when we ended the show, we didn't really do do it justice. So we're going to back up and go back to Wednesday's show, not this show, Wednesday's meeting. And we're going to re-hit a couple points out of that meeting. And then we're going to jump forward to the meeting that was held today in Senate Finance. So we're going to answer the question or look at why it is possible for $5 gas, why they say that it's possible for $5 gas. We're also going to look and see how would the state have to pay for cost overruns? Because we've heard legislators say, the state should not have to pay for cost overruns. And that is a true statement. I believe. I think everybody believes the state doesn't need to pay for any additional costs and, as the project gets built, right? We don't want to be on the hook for that. Taxpayers don't want to be on the hook. But how could we be? There's a way that we could be, and we need to understand the ways that could happen. Okay. Why haven't we reached FID? I hear that all the time. People are like, what are they waiting on? Why haven't we? This project's never going to happen, because if they haven't reached it by now, it's not going to happen. Okay. We're going to spend a significant portion of time tonight learning about the process of FID, and hopefully at the end we'll understand what it takes to reach FID, and maybe why it is taking longer than what we have been told or expected. Pertinent to the previous conversation, the questions I was asking, what is it that the state of Alaska has already put into this? What have we already paid for the pipeline? Like the state of Alaska funded all of the permitting. We've been working on this for a decade, right? What is that cost that the state has already put into this? I think it's an important concept. If you've got Senate Resources was trying to scuttle this bill and scuttle the pipeline, right? They don't want to see it happen. What does that mean? Like, how many dollars are wasted if we were to just stop now and not enable this project to go forward? What are we leaving on the table if we did that? Let me phrase this question. Will phase 2, which is the liquefaction plant, the export facility, liquefaction and export facility, will phase 2 be built if phase 1 is built? And another way to ask that question is, could the state get stuck with just a pipeline and not an export facility, which would mean really high prices for us? And how does that work? Okay. We're going to get some answers to those questions tonight, and I think we'll be better for it. Okay. All right. Let's jump in and talk about $5 gas. Is there any hope? Okay. Again, we've got with us Nick Fulford with GaffneyKline briefing the Senate Finance Committee, and that's who we're going to join now. Let's see. Frank is asking, could there be any unintended consequences to the state building a gas line? Could there be unintended consequences to? I will ponder that as we're talking, and I don't know of any right at the moment, unless you think economic growth is bad, or like you don't have oil spills, you don't have gas spills. I mean, I guess you could have a gas leak, but yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, and I've never really thought about that question, Frank, but let's ponder it. Okay. Let's hear from Nick on a small portion that we heard last night, and then a portion that we did not hear last night. And this will help us with the conversation about cost of gas to us.
So what I've set out on this slide is...
Okay, remember this slide from last night, okay? I got to make it big, otherwise you can't see it. There we go. So to set this slide up, he's talking about the pipeline only part of the project. Okay, this doesn't include a gas line. I'm sorry, an export facility. So it's only talking about the project phase 1, volume of gas, okay? Somewhere between 250 to 500 million standard cubic feet per day right here. If you can see my cursor. Maybe you can't see my cursor. So right in the top three green lines, the dark and gray is the 300, and then the shades of green are the 500. And what this is signifying is the throughput of the gas pipeline at maybe a minimum or a low level of 300 MCF or 500 MCF. Okay, and down here at the bottom is your price that the seller is selling, right? The producer's selling, the cost of the gas, I guess I should say. And then what does that mean for delivered gas cost? Okay. We've heard the number $12 per MMBTU, which is the cost that your utility would buy the gas for. Okay. And what this slide is showing is that only in a certain circumstance would we be really close to this $12 gas. $1 sale from the producer, right? The cost of gas is $1. And and the cost of the pipeline down here. I was like, what is the other part? So the dark green line signifies the $10 billion cost of the pipeline. So if the pipeline is not 10 billion and it's more than 10 billion, like let's just say it's 12 billion, then you're no longer on that green line. You're on the next lighter shade of green right here. Okay. If the cost of the pipeline is actually 14 billion, then you're on this other lighter shade of green. Okay. So this is the point of this slide, is to show you that it isn't likely at $10 billion, if you're paying $1.50 for gas, if that's the cost of gas, that you're going to be at the $12 range. And remember yesterday, I popped up the chart of what other utilities in the lower 48 are paying for gas, $12 being down near the bottom, the lowest being 8, 52 or 56 being the highest at in Hawaii, right? Average maybe somewhere around 25. Okay. So this is showing that with just a pipeline and a 10% return on investment for the developer, it is unlikely that we're going to ever see $12 gas. If the cost of the pipeline is actually more than what we think it is right now, or what the numbers we're using now, and it's more like 12 or 14, then that cost for us is not 12. It is, well, let me say that the price of gas maybe is a little higher, somewhere between 12 and maybe 18. That would be where we would be, where our utilities would be buying gas. Okay. If it was just the pipeline. Okay. The reason for that is because it's only 500 MCF throughput, because that's the demand. That's the amount of gas that's flowing through the pipeline that we can consume. Okay. So one of the ways that changes and the price for us changes is if that cost or the amount of gas goes up. And if the amount of gas goes up, then we have we spread the cost around across more users, and that cost comes down. Okay. That's what we're going to see in the next slide that we didn't see last night. Okay. So just to help you understand this slide and what this is telling us is that it is unlikely with the current project costs and what we think is actually higher costs, that $12 gas is actually, that's like the floor. The real costs are actually going to be a little higher in reality. Okay. And that's what our utilities would be charging. What this also means is if we don't have enough throughput, meaning we can't find a AI data center, or we can't find a mine that needs more gas, or there's not additional use of gas, and we're actually producing or consuming 300 MCF, or maybe it's less than 300 MCF, maybe it's only 250 MCF, then the less that you consume, the higher it goes on this scale. You see how that is? These three lines are all 500 MCF throughput. The higher lines are 300 MCF. So if we're not even doing 300 MCF, then or if 300 is the minimum, then your cost at a midpoint in the cost of the pipeline, it's more than 10, but less than 14. Your midpoint is somewhere between or right around 25. So $25 per MCF to the utility. Okay. Like I said, we already paid 16, my understanding, to Hillcorp for gas this winter. All right. So it is possible that the pipeline gas is going to charge, if we didn't build an export facility, would be charging us somewhere around $25 MCF if you don't have an export facility. So then the question becomes, well, what if you could import gas at $16 where we're at right now? Well, then it is cheaper to import it than it is to buy it out of the pipeline, right? And you will hear people say that. Well, we don't need to build pipeline. It's cheaper to build it out of the to import it. So we just need to import it because that's the least cost out of the two comparisons. And then the importation cost and local cook inlet cost is going to be somewhere similar, or maybe cook inlet cost is greater than importation cost. I don't know. Point is, if this is as far as somebody has a conversation and they say, well, you're never going to get the phase 2 built. They're never going to export it. And we're going to get stuck with this. And then we've got a bunch of gas that we're going to have to pay a bunch of money for. It's going to be more expensive. Okay. I personally think that people who are at that level, and that's where they stop thinking, are short-sighted. They're not seeing the complete picture here. Okay. So now, and people who come to that conclusion are not talking apples to apples when the governor is saying we're going to have $5 MCF. So you need to understand, when the governor says $5 MCF, he's not talking about this. This project or this part of the project is not what he's talking about. He's talking about once you have the entire project built. Okay. So gas flowing in 29 is this gas. Gas flowing in 32, I think, is the export facility. And that is a completely different gas. Now, we're going to go look at that chart right now. Let me tee that up for you.
Proceed.
Thank you. So the last point I wanted to make around the phase 1 gas supply is, as and when the LNG project does come to fruition, then of course the effect you were seeing.
LNG project come to fruition means the pipeline plus the export facility. So phase 1 and phase 2.
With the lack of economies of scale in the last two slides is reversed.
Okay. I'm going to pause this, and this is going to be disjointed, but what he's pointing at is the slide we just looked at. There is a lack of economy of scale because we only have 300 minimum MCF throughput, right? So this slide is showing that you've got 3 BCF, 3.3 BCF. So 3 billion cubic feet per day. Okay. So the economy of scale is that you have a much larger throughput because most of that gas is being exported. So that means that at the same cost of gas, either $1 or $1.50 from the North Slope, that money goes to the producers, and your tariff on this side per downstream tariff is that's added to the well, let me see, what does that say? No, this is the cost of the gas. And the same cost of the pipeline. Okay, so if we're using a 12 billion cost of pipeline like we looked at it on the previous slide, then that's the center line. So the center line here is where your gas could be per 3 billion MCF. So when we say that we could be at $5 a gas, that is only because we have a economy of scale and we are sending so much gas out the pipeline that is helping reduce the cost for us. Okay. So that is why the governor can say, well, look, they're projecting that we could have $5 gas. Does it end up being 5 or does it end up being more than 5? Well, that all depends on the cost of the pipeline, what the tax situation is, that it all factors into it. But that's why he can say $5 gas. If he's wrong and it ends up being $8 gas, that's better than what we're paying right now. Okay. It's better than imported cost. It's better than Cook Inlet gas cost. Okay. So that's the whole point. If you don't get to the exportation of the gas, North Slope gas, then just on us is way expensive, and it wouldn't make sense in my opinion. It wouldn't make sense for Alaskans. The Glenfarne, the project developer, it might still make economic sense to them. If they can come up with $12 billion, build a pipeline, and then charge us $30 an MCF, well then, if we're going to buy that because we don't have alternatives, then, it could still be economical for them. I don't think that would be the case, because why would we do that if we've got an ability to import, or Cook Inlet gas is cheaper, right? So that doesn't seem plausible in my mind. But because there's a sequence, because Glenfarne is sequencing this in phase 1 and then phase 2, there's this perception out here that we're going to get stuck with high cost gas. So later tonight, we're going to understand that the reasoning behind putting it in 2 different phases like this is to help make the phase 2 more cost effective, because it's the larger piece to finance. The pipeline, they have to find $10 to $12 to $14 billion to finance the pipeline, but it's a $40 to $60 billion project, right? That means the other $30 billion is the export facility, the liquefaction plant, and the export facility. So that's the harder piece. That's the piece that requires more money to loan money to find investors for. Okay, so how do you get investors to want to do that piece of it? You de-risk that part of the project by already having gas. The pipeline is already being built. It's already being constructed, or it's already constructed. There's already gas flowing, right? By 29. So then the conversation with regard to building phase 2 is a no-brainer at that point. It de-risks the project immensely, because you've got the capacity of 3 billion cubic feet per day coming through the pipeline. What are you going to do with that if that's what's going to come through the pipeline? You've got an agreement with the seller to send that much pipe or that much gas down the pipeline. It de-risks, and it makes it more likely that export facility is going to get built. So that's, I think, why they've done it this way, is because they see that the bigger hurdle to overcome from a financing perspective is phase 2, not phase 1. You got to get phase 1 done, and at least an FID on that before you go to the investors for some sort of assurance that you're going to be able to have gas when you build the import or the export facility, right? Why would they want to build that if you aren't sure that you're going to get a pipeline built? So it's a sequence of events that has to happen in order to find the financing. That's my understanding. Okay. Let's finish this conversation and then we'll move on.
And the potential for gas delivery to NSTAR or Chugach or one of the utilities for less than $5 becomes a reality. So with the additional 3 BCF of gas coming down the line for the LNG, the economics of energy supply to Fairbanks and South Central is transformed. So really that's what this slide says.
Okay, so that is from yesterday. We're going to continue on because we're going to, I'm sorry, I was getting ahead of myself. We're not going to jump to today's meeting. We're going to hear some talk here to answer the question, how would the state have to pay for cost overruns? That is an important conversation that we need to have, and they discussed it here a little bit in committee. And Frank, you're such a downer. Frank says, can the state survive a gas line being built? Well, your first question you asked was, could there be any unintended consequences to the state of building a gas line? I don't know. It sounds like you woke up on the wrong side of the bed, Frank. Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Craig. I wasn't sure what we were pulling from Cook Inlet, but your stats here, if they're accurate, we're at 200 MCF is what we're consuming right now, right? Because that's the only place we're getting gas is from Cook Inlet, and thus the 300 mark is optimistic. It's optimistic that we would be able to consume that much. If we don't consume 300, then that means the price is likely a little bit higher than what we saw on the chart. So you're talking a serious increase in the cost of gas if or during the period where you don't have a export facility for however long that is. Okay. Let's get on with this conversation here.
So I wanted to finish off, for the most part, talking about the LNG market.
I can't remember whether we had this slide on, we discussed it earlier, but this is an interesting slide. We have seen the rainbow slide here, the gradient slide, the red boxes here, and his explanation of what profitability means is something that's in addition to the DOR presentation. And I think this has been very helpful in understanding the economics of the project and why, especially why the cost of gas that is cost of LNG that is leaving Alaska is such a, we're in such a strong position for that. This project is.
One of the illustrative pieces of material that's been used in the various hearings to date has been this so-called break-even matrix from Department of Revenue, which I personally find exceptionally helpful in communicating, where this project sits in terms of global market. Mr. Stickle has explained this matrix, I think, to you. And what it ultimately means is that if you can push the break-even price of delivery to Asia to the top left-hand corner of this matrix, then you have an exceptionally competitive project. The more you move away from that top left corner, whether it's because the CapEx invested in the project is higher or whether it's the gas supply price that's higher, you then start eroding the competitiveness of the project. And ultimately, of course, you get to the point where you simply cannot deliver gas at a competitive price. So the first thing I did with this chart is to look at the last 10 years of LNG deliveries into Asia. So I used the Japanese customs data for imported LNG. And from 2016 to 2026, the average was $10.41. So what I did with this chart was I drew a box around the entries in the box that would result in a delivered price to Asia of less than $10.41. So effectively, this is a kind of what I've called a zone of profitability. And you can see the difference between the original the existing property tax mechanism and the governor's bill proposed a couple of months back with the 6 cents per MMBTU, per MCF AVT. So what you can see there is that zone of profitability is expanded somewhat. So what that means is that the project could sustain a higher increase in capital cost, or it could sustain a higher gas price and still remain competitive against that 10-year price. So that was my kind of starting point. And again, I think it's worth highlighting, the cost of the LNG project in Alaska is indeed very, very high indeed. But the the cost of the delivered gas to Asia is not necessarily high. And it's because of the short shipping distance and the relatively low cost of gas that enables you to do that. So when we talk about the cost of the project, I think it's useful to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. Yes, it's from a capital point of view, it's costly, but from a delivered gas point of view, it need not be.
Senator Stedman and Senator Keel.
On this chart here on previous page, whatever it was, 19, what's the capital cost used? Because that's one of the, I guess, indigestion points that we have is the lack of or using dated capital costs. Could you help us with that? Then I got a comment.
Yes, thank you, Senator, through the chair. This uses the DOR base capex assumption, which is, I believe, $46 billion, which is inflated from one of the previous capital cost estimates that was put out there, I think, in a Wood Mac report a couple of years ago.
35 billion?
Well, I think 35 billion was certainly around at one time, but I think that's probably wishful thinking these days. So yes, base capex is $46 billion in this example.
Senator Stedman.
But just for clarity, is that today's value or is that 46 billion is the base 10 years ago extrapolated out with inflation?
46 is today's value.
Yeah, well, okay. So I hope when Glen Farm comes in here and has a discussion, they use a little more accurate numbers, because this committee has spent year after year after year dealing with construction projects all across the state. And we have massive inflation and cost escalations over the last decade, to the point where we've had to put in tens of millions of dollars backfill for OMB, excuse me, not OMB, but our contractors to facilitate the completion of their contracts, even several years ago dealing with asphalt. So that number is complete garbage, and it makes it very misleading. So we're going to have to deal with that somehow at this table to get a rough idea of what actual costs we're looking at, especially when somebody's going to sit at the end of the table and ask for a concession. Because if they need a concession on a $45 billion project, what are they going to ask for when it's $70 billion?
Thank you, Senator Stedman, through the chair. I think you've hit there on, perhaps one of the major features that needs to be addressed and developed with the developer.
And if I could, I think what I'm referring to here is the base cost, not inadvertent cost overruns. And I think at some point we're going to have a discussion over LNG Canada, sitting right south of Ketchikan, and their significant financial impacts they had on cost overruns, to the point where Ottawa had to come in and bail them out. So
how would that happen for Alaska?
we need to have, as accurate a numbers as absolutely possible.
And I don't think we have the numbers here at the table, and I don't think anyone remembers, but we need to get the projected cost of the Trans-Alaska pipeline and the actual cost, which was substantially higher than doubled from my recollection. But for the committee's reference, that information would be very interesting to have, and we will get those numbers for the committee to review.
You understand, when you get down to the actual building of the pipeline, all of the way that the contracts are written for the contractors that are coming in to do it is critical, right? Because everybody that's going to be part of building this pipeline is going to be looking for a way to make as much money as they can, to squeeze as much money out of this mega project as possible. And all that does is increase the cost of the project. That's the incentive built in to a project like this, is your contractors come in and they're like, dollar signs in their eyes. They're saying they've got their kids' education paid for. The new boat is already on order, right? It is how much money can we get from this project? Just like we do the same thing with the federal government. In some cases, we do it with the state government funds, right? That's just the nature of it. So discipline and having contracts that help control this this desire to make as much money as you can off of this project is the challenge that Glenfarne is going to happen. And yeah, I agree. This is something that is going to be an issue with in-state contractors, and that's why you have out-of-state contractors, meaning you have some competition come in to help put a downwards pressure on the incentive or the natural inclination to charge the project as much as you can, right? The contractor's not necessarily looking at the big picture and saying, look, for every dollar I make here, I'm going to have to spend more on the cost of gas a couple years down the road. They're not looking at that. They don't care. So this is the benefit of being able to bring in outside labor and ensure that you've got some kind of competition. It's also the other reason why you have to have competition with regard to organized labor, because organized labor is notorious for jacking up prices and causing cost overruns. What do they care? They don't. As long as their members are getting more and more money, they're happy. Do they care whether the project has overruns? Not if there's a government or some large entity that's, got deep pockets. They don't care. That's where the managers on the ground matter, right? That's the real world implications of the policy that we're talking about today with regard to cost overruns. All right. Yeah, Frank, it is a little bit of a squirrel. And Frank, no, I did not read your email. I have got my email open and I do not have an email from you. Producer@oversightlive.com. Here is the email again. Resend it if you want me to read it. Okay, let's go.
Senator Keel.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fulford, I actually have wanted to ask the ignorant question about when a project goes to FID. You've got the best cost estimates in engineering you can get. Everybody signs. And unexpected costs do pop up. As the co-chair Stedman said, with public transportation infrastructure projects, we know where those get covered. Within the LNG industry, pipeline and LNG industry, where do those get covered? Is it a mixture of going back to gas suppliers and lowering their cost? Is it lowering the pipeline builders' profit over time? Is it raising cost to the customer? Is it the public fisc? I mean, how's that work in the industry?
Thank you, Senator Keel. It's probably worth, through the chair, it's probably worth dividing projects up into those which are pure LNG export projects, and then those which involve some degree of in-state supply or gasification of the host government. But for LNG projects that are kind of intended just for gas export, the cost inflation after FID, which certainly for some of the Australian projects has been a huge issue, it typically gets dealt with in two ways. One is that some of it has to be absorbed by the equity investors, but particularly after some of
equity investors, keep that in mind, okay? Because that's going to come up here in just a minute.
The very significant cost escalation which we've seen in some LNG projects these days, some degree of cost guarantee is pushed onto the EPC contractor. And then, of course, you're into the question of change orders and changes to the design and so forth. But with a project of this scale, there will be very significant and well-capitalized EPC companies building it, but even they wouldn't have the balance sheet to support more than, I would say, a modest cost difference. And indeed, EPC contractors, not surprisingly, do charge for taking price risk. You know, if you let a contract that doesn't have a price cap, the price will be less than one that does, because it's a question of risk and reward. So on a project of this scale, certainly you would want to ensure that the equity stakeholders involved have sufficient scope and capacity to absorb some degree of cost escalation.
Okay, so his recommendation is identifying that the equity investors, the investors who are giving the loans to build the project, are the ones that are likely to cover the majority of the cost of any sort of overrun or additional cost to the project. Okay, so that's critical. Who are equity investors in this regard? That's a question that we need to answer the question of, right? As Glenfarne is talking right now, that is somebody outside that is bringing money in. Are we talking pension funds? Are we talking BlackRock? Are we talking foreign governments? What are we talking about? Okay. Are we talking about state government? Because nothing that we've had a conversation about yet is the state of Alaska being an equity investor, meaning the state is going to put more money forward to help this pipeline get built. That is something that I think everybody has been universally opposed to. All right. We don't want to put more. We've already put, as we'll find out, we've already put $1 billion into this pipeline. We don't want to put any more in. But who is the equity investor? Because that is going to be key here in just a minute. Because what I'm doing is leading us to identifying how it is the state would then become on the hook. You won't have a conversation about the state being paying for the project and paying for the cost runs. You're going to have a conversation about the state becoming an equity investor. So you need to know that one equals the other.
The key question, of course, which applies in this case, is what effect might that have on in-state gas supply? And I think I've heard reference to testimony which suggests that following FID on the gas pipeline element of the project, that the gas tariffs negotiated as part of that package would be unaffected by cost escalation. But I'm not sure that I've seen that set out in writing.
Senator Keel.
Thank you. And I warned you it was an ignorant question. When you say equity investors will absorb, does that mean write another check? Or does that mean we're going to go borrow the difference and you'll get a lower return on the check you already wrote us, or something else?
Thank you, Senator Keel. That's a good question. It's a combination. And it depends on the sort of financial management decisions of the equity participants. But yes, often additional borrowing would be required. And, you know, there are some projects that have put considerable strain on the balance sheets of the companies involved because of these cost overruns.
If I may.
Senator Keel.
Thank you. That's helpful. And it's putting my head in a decent spot. I think you said that was that answer was specific to pure LNG export projects. What is the historical trend? What tends to happen in projects where there is a local gas supply component as well? How does that differ?
That's another excellent question through the chair. I mentioned earlier in today's meeting that domestic supply is often woven into the very core of the LNG legislation in the host nation. And when that happens, as I say, sometimes the price of domestic gas is fixed. That there's a determination that, let's say, $5 an MMBTU is the price which will enable the domestic market to function and to use gas. And in that case, regardless of where the costs of the project end up, because that number is sort of burnt into contract. It stays where it is. I think somebody made the comment earlier that once the LNG project here is kind of fully functioning, that the economic significance of in-state supply is relatively low. And so it's conceivable that I think in the bigger picture, some kind of protection for in-state supply could be worked into the broader framework for the project, because there are probably bigger elements that the project developer needs to concern themselves with.
Senator Keel.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That would be something you could write in at the beginning. My worry is about cost overruns once FID has happened, and where that cash comes from to take care of the in-state supply. I share Senator Stedman's belief that if we have a gas line, there will be additional oil down taps. I also share an element in my district that there won't be any gas coming here from that. If my district were to get gas, it would come from Canada. It's just geography, right? So I very much want affordable gas into Senator Kaufman's district. I have several family members who live in his district. That's important to me, but I also have to protect my constituents to whom I'm accountable from calls on the Treasury for gas they won't get. So I'm trying to figure out where the risk points are. And I appreciate
trust me, we'll take care of it.
Thank you,
Senator Keel, Senator Kaufman, and then Senator Stedman.
Thank you, Mr. Fulford. There's these hearings are often, a cloud of considerations, of concerns, all the many things that people think of to wonder and worry about. I'm just curious, given your expertise and the capabilities of GaffneyKline, have you produced or been asked to produce a tabulation that could be what's essentially a decision support package? So we have to decide what to do.
Senator Kaufman comes from process improvement background. He's a very structured, process-oriented thinker. And his question here is not so much about the pipeline as it is about the decision, the process that this committee is engaging in and the legislature is engaging in making the decisions that need to be made. And we're going to fast forward through it. It is a conversation that has value, but not to the conversation we're having now about the gas line. It does tell us that maybe, at least from Senator Kaufman's perspective, he might sense that this committee has the risk of just dragging this out and not actually finding a decision, of not reaching a decision. And so how do you visualize what has to happen given the time that we have to keep this committee focused on actually doing what has been asked and what we would like to see happen, right? So valid conversation, but not for tonight. I'm going to go here to, I think it's Senator Stedman's pertinent question. Probably right in here somewhere.
I'm talking about in concept now. Our fight back against the that we're in right now.
Have been around. That's not at all the case, but that's the line of razzle dazzle they gave us. But to the utility question and the concern dealing with the rail belt and cost overruns, I think back on another project when we were looking at the construction of the Continental Line heading down towards Chicago area. There was a lot of discussion on how to finance it, and one of the proposals that was brought up and talked about was the utilities are going to back it. And that's what we were told by the then administration. Well, the utilities can't back it. They can't afford to take the cost overrun positions, and they're barred by the regulators to do that. And I think that's one of the questions we need to find out from our regulatory environment. But my expectation is the utilities and rail belt will not be allowed to do that. It would wipe them out to scale. And same with the old Continental Line. They would be barred. But we sat in the governor's conference room and were told point blank that that's how it was going to be financed. And that was just complete BS. So we need to clarify the state's position on that, Mr. Chairman, but I'll be shocked if they could back this and expose themselves to cost overruns.
Thank you. Do you have comment, Mr. Folkford, on Senator Stedman's statement?
Thank you, Chair. I would say in response to Senator Stedman's remarks that one consideration certainly is that the RCA and the existing regulatory framework that they operate under is probably worth looking at in some detail in the sense that it was probably never really designed for a project at this scale with such wide-ranging economic consequences for the South Central area and indeed Fairbanks.
As I was listening to today's meeting, not this recording, but today's meeting that we'll see here in a minute, it came to my awareness that we might need to consider preempting the RCA with regard to this project and any decisions. Meaning, the RCA is going, the people that are appointed there, they're going to be the bottleneck, as we're going to learn. It may not be the outcome may not be what we want. And it will be, it would be bad. Let's just say that. So maybe the legislature needs to consider plucking this project and any of the related decisions that the RCA would normally be involved in, just pluck it right out of their authority and just by statute, preempt them from having jurisdiction over this particular project. That way, the legislature has control over that and it is not in the hands of a handful of people that work at the RCA, which I think is probably the wisest thing to do.
So examining the current regulatory framework and considering what it might have to look like to guard against scenarios such as Senator Stedman described is certainly something I think which probably warrants examination.
Thank you, Senator Stedman. Please proceed.
Thank you. So the next three slides involve more pricing data, really. So this is a graphical representation of what I used to come up with the 10-year average price that I used for the zone of profitability. And you can see that the price of LNG into Japan has been relatively volatile over the last 10 years. There was a relative softening of price really in the lead up to kind of 2018, when a lot of US LNG was coming onto the market. Then we saw this big dip around 2020 caused by the industrial demand collapse from COVID. And then, of course, we had the Ukraine crisis, which created a very tight LNG supply environment, mainly because Europe was using up so much LNG, much of which came from the US. I also put the current forward curve on there, which gives you some sense of how much prices have jumped since the military action in the Middle East. But of course, in terms of that forward price, it does stabilize again over the next couple of years. So that blue or turquoise rectangle represents the zone where, based on the previous slide, the Alaska profit would have been profitable.
So you're basically talking about the bottom of the line here is somewhere under $10, and the top of the line is somewhere over $20. And this is per MCF, and that's exported cost to Japan, China, Korea, wherever else we're exporting it to, right? And that is all the the international market as to what it would sustain during this. And as he points out, and I'm going to jump to another part of the slide here, but as he points out this orange blocks that is below that, anytime it's not in there means that it's a challenge for the project. Okay, I want to get back to the concept of the investor, of the equity position. Okay, and I thought it was coming up here, but I don't think it is. I think we have to go back to an earlier conversation in this particular meeting that's easy to find because I have it written down right here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Keel. Senator Stedman.
Don't we already own 25% of that? 75-25 is a split between us and Glen Farm, was my understanding.
So my understanding is that the 75-25 split relates to the holding company, and that as and when FID is taken on the sub-companies, capital will be, put into those companies, who will then potentially pay a dividend up to the holding. So my understanding is that the state has 25% in the holding company, but as and when FID is taken on these other 3 units, there will be a further election that will have to be made.
Senator Stedman.
Who owns the 3 sub-companies in?
Currently, they are owned by 8-Star, the holding company, but then they have no assets. I think at the point they have assets assigned to them, then equity in those subcontracts, sub-projects will be set. And we talked earlier about the likelihood that potentially other equity investors will participate in the project. So, they would probably be present in those sub-project companies as well.
Okay, so this is what I wanted to highlight and tie the 2 parts of the meeting together. The concept of cost overruns being felt heaviest, and the risk of who's going to pay for cost overruns falling on your equity investors, and the fact that the state of Alaska owns 25% of 8-Star and has this opportunity to become a 25% equity investor. That means the 25% of the cost, if we were to become bring the equity forward, we would also accept the risk of the cost overruns. If we do not exercise 25% ownership and we do not put forward any capital, we are not an equity investor, then that means the cost overruns doesn't fall on us. The only time that the state of Alaska would then have risk for accepting cost overruns would be if somebody comes with their hand out to the legislature during a legislative session and says, please, would you include an extra $1 billion or $2 billion in your budget? Because we've had some cost overruns in this gas line and we need some help. And that would be the equity investors coming, asking, or the project builder coming and saying, well, we may be stopping the project unless you help. Right? So the state doesn't automatically pick up, at this point, the state doesn't automatically pick up responsibility for cost overruns. We're not an equity investor in the project. Only when we exercise the 25% ownership by buying in, by seizing that equity, would we then pick up some automatic response for cost overruns. That's how that would work. No equity investment, no exposure to that cost overruns, other than you can always go to the legislature and ask for an appropriation. That's what we do to the federal government and the state government all the time, right? Hey, we need a new library. Can we go get a loan from the government, from the state? We need a new library here in the local. And then the library gets done, but it's almost done, and now it costs more. So you come back the following fiscal year and you're like, hey, you gave us $1 million for the library, but it's actually going to be $1.2 million. Contractors were more than, can you please give us some more? I mean, that happens all the time. So that's the way that the legislature would exercise or decide to support cost overruns if it's not an equity investor. But at the point we become an equity investor with that 25% ownership, that's when we have risk for having to cover additional costs going forward. My understanding. If I missed anything, please, Excuse me. Somebody correct me. Okay. All right. We're going to jump to today's meeting. Let's go there now. Okay. This is same briefing or same committee, same briefer, Nick Fulford, and a different topic here at the table, Senate Finance table. What we're talking about now is, let me make sure I've got the right location here. What we're talking about now is, what is the state already in for with this project? Okay, what have we already spent on the project?
Sunk in the project. A ballpark number of what we've got invested in the gas line. And recently there's been some forgiveness given on gravel extraction. And that's several tens of millions of dollars in concessions. So I just thought I'd put that on the table, that there is concessions and expenditures that we've already facing that we're not recognizing. And this is just another step. And as you mentioned earlier, Mr. Fulford, I think we should expect, if we get to further down this project and get to major gas offtakes on the North Slope, we'll probably be asked for concessions on the upstream. Is that accurate from what you've told us or mentioned?
Thank you, Senator Stedman. I think that's a good appraisal. And as you say, over the years, I've seen the same estimates that you have. I think $1 billion of state funds being deployed to get the project moving. I think, perhaps for people at home as well, it's worth remembering some of the maths that we did yesterday. So it's $1 billion of state funding, but every year this project will be selling 1 billion MMBTUs of gas. So, you know, if you were to add $1 for the first year or for any year, you would get that $1 billion back. But so in the general scheme of things, of a project of this importance and magnitude, it's not unusual for funding of that level to have to be deployed as part of the project development. It has to be said that the Alaska LNG project has probably been, you know, one of the longest running gas development stories that we've ever seen, and because of that, the funding is significant. But as I say, the value of that $1 billion would come back relatively quickly if the project were to go ahead. That's useful to bear in mind.
Further questions on this slide? With that, we'll take a 5-minute break.
Okay, so they're going to take a break. We're not going to take a break. We're going to jump ahead to the FID discussion. I thought it was important for people to understand the kind of the totality, or at least the estimate of the totality of what over the last decade or so the state of Alaska has spent on getting us to this point. Because if you're having a conversation and it's entering into your mind that you're like, yeah, well, maybe we don't need this project. Maybe we'd rather have renewables and we don't really want to have a gas line. Well, then what did we just spend $1 billion for in permitting, right? I mean, you're just going to throw that money away? That seems like the wrong thing to do to me. If we're this close to a project and all it means is we've got to come to an agreement on the right tax structure, and the project developer says he can move forward with it, you know, let's not throw $1 billion away because we have a political disagreement here on energy strategy. Okay, jumping to the FID question and understanding what it is that we're dealing with FID, and fairly straightforward process, but a little lengthy to communicate. But we're going to go there right now. And this is a good history of kind of where we were and where we are. As soon as I can move my mouse and talk at the same time. So right about here.
And process of FID. I know it's something that you'll be delving into in the next few days and in the next few weeks. But I wanted to set out some ground rules and perhaps talk more generally as to how FID typically takes place. So on this slide we have in front of us now, and I think certainly many of the committee have been on courses and discussions around mega projects and how they work. But certainly for the folks at home, it's probably useful to kind of recap a little bit. So the key thing to bear in mind is the kind of pre-feasibility process where, you'd look at the rough costs of the capital, you'd look at the economics of the gas, you'd look at the market, and you'd establish whether there was a sufficiently robust project to spend money on. So that really would be the decision gate one. It's like, yeah, we've got a project here that works. And the next phase would be kind of a concept selection. For example, are you going to do floating LNG? Is it going to be fixed? What type of liquefaction might you use? And that's when, typically you'd start spending in the millions of dollars in terms of engineering and costing. But the real decision to deploy significant capital happens at decision gate 3, which is where you'd move into FEED, front-end engineering design, which for a major LNG project would be tens of millions of dollars. So this would be at the point where you have a project that you feel is promising enough to deploy quite significant funds to develop.
Okay, so our project that we're sitting with today, and what we just heard about the estimate of $1 billion being spent by the state already, and that's largely through AGDC, was all in this red assess and select stage through gates 1 and 2. Okay, this is where the state of Alaska fronted the money to get us to decision gate 3, and going into decision gate 3 is when we handed the baton off to Glenfarne, and they said they were going to bring their, what is to be estimated to be $150 million of their own money, not state money anymore, to take it from there to decision gate 4, which would be your FID decision. Okay, so the develop piece of this is all on Glenfarne. They've brought their private money or wherever they get their money from to get through this FEED stage. The state of Alaska has already put in $1 billion up to this point to get all the permitting done and all the concept and all of the work to get to that stage. So that's where we're at now. What does it take to get through the decision gate 4? That's what we're going to hear about here.
So this is, my understanding is that this is kind of the phase that we're in at the moment with Glenfarne. One of the benefits of that $1 billion that we were talking about earlier that the state has spent is that certain aspects of this project are very, very well advanced indeed. And in fact, a lot of that work that was done under SB 138 is being reused now. Obviously updated and amended. But when you think about that money that was deployed, you do have, as a result, this relatively detailed concept of what the project would look like. However, there continue to be key aspects of that which still need to be defined. And probably the biggest one, which we've been talking about a lot over the last couple of days and the last few weeks, is these capital cost estimates and how they're coming in. So typically, as you see on this diagram, the point at which you would reach the final investment decision would be after you've carried out this front-end engineering design. you have more accurate data on costs and who is going to build it. And at that point, it's in general terms, I suppose you could call it the point of no return. So once you get to FID, then you're signing binding supply contracts, you're signing EPC agreements. You need to have much of the regulatory process in place. And so, for example, all the work that we've seen reported in the press in terms of letters of agreement and letters of intent in terms of LNG, all those things would need to turn into typically, a sale and purchase agreement to enable things to move forward. So the key points I've mentioned are kind of listed on this slide: project technical scope. So you need to know exactly what is being implemented, the key design parameters. One of the other features which is common in a project of this size is to do a kind of risk analysis. And that's something that we do quite frequently as a sort of a pre-FID checklist. Because ultimately, as we've discussed, LNG Canada, a good example, and the pipeline, even when you get to FID, you haven't removed all the risk in terms of cost. So that kind of risk assessment and looking at where your vulnerabilities are would be key. The other feature, given the scale of the project, is debt funding. As we've discussed, a project of this sort probably be 60, 70%, maybe even more, financed on what they call a non-recourse basis. So this would be off balance sheet. So companies would contract with a consortium of banks that would lend the money and would take some degree of risk themselves. But in moving to FID, everyone is doing due diligence, but the banks probably do more than anybody. And certainly I've seen LNG projects that have had to have been quite significantly reworked at a relatively late stage, simply because the lending community are not comfortable with the degree of risk and risk mitigations that's happened. So one of the key challenges for this project, when you're probably looking at $30 billion or so of debt, is between now and FID, the people providing that $30 billion have to go through this project with a fine-tooth comb and consider every kind of scenario to make sure the money is safe. So in some ways, if the project can secure $30 billion of debt, then right there's a relatively high degree of confidence in the project's ability to go forward. So as I say, the due diligence carried out by the lending community on a project of this scale would be immense and very, very thorough. So with that, I'll move on. If there's a question,
Senator Stedman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So we've talked about that mid 40 range cost factor, and some of us believe it's complete nonsense, right? It's an old number that's not relevant. And we'll get into that when we get into our modeling in a couple of days. But if they do the 70% debt level, there is the government loan guarantees and backing that we need to get an understanding for over the next several days, what that entails. But my understanding from the federal folks that I've talked to, it's if you do 20 years, it's 20 years plus 3/8 on the government bond. If you do 30-year financing, it's 30 government bonds plus 3/8. Pretty straightforward. But what's not straightforward is 70% of 45, which is about 30 billion in debt, and a more realistic number, just dealing with some of the cost escalations, is in the neighborhood of 60 billion, maybe over, because from what we understand that construction and pipeline construction costs have escalated a little faster than inflation. So it's probably somewhere north of 60. But just using 60, that's a debt increase of 12 billion. $12 billion's a big cash flow payment to meet in and of itself. So when we start looking at the cash flow modeling, that's a significant issue. The price of this project and that 70% debt level. And I think the common terms or ranges from 60% debt to 80% debt. So just using the middle number at 60, and we can run the different scenarios, but somebody has to meet those semi-annual bond payments. And $12 billion is a lot of money. And it shouldn't be, just disregarded. So we'll work on that with the model that we have in place that I think members will find it's a sound model. It's the inputs that we're going to be having significant concern about. And that model's been worked on and assembled over the last several years. It's not something that was just put together.
So why haven't we reached FID? Glenfarne has said multiple times, hey, we think we're going to be at FID by this certain date. This month, we think we'll have FID. Why haven't we reached it? Well, maybe it's because the investors are looking at the project and they have at least one question that keeps them from saying, yes, we're comfortable with signing on the dotted line. Maybe just one that has to do with legislative action. What is the tax regime going to be? Maybe that is what's holding up FID. Maybe it is what has always been holding up FID. The investors have always known that this is going to hold it up. The project managers have always known that this is going to hold it up. It's a conversation that has always been necessary to have, and we have not had it. Okay. I personally asked AGDC this question before Glenfarne was even on a picture years ago. What is the tax policy going to be? What is going to be necessary? And does the state need to start thinking about this in order for whoever comes on or however to make the project feasible? Do we need to address the tax situation in order to incentivize somebody to come on and take over the project, to want to come in and build it? Because back when I was asking a question, we didn't have anybody that wanted to build the project. It has always been the question. What is the tax structure going to be for this taxing jurisdiction? So why hasn't Glenfarne hasn't been able to go to FID? It's not necessarily the front end engineering and design work that they're responsible for. It likely is the financing piece of it, where somebody who is controlling the purse strings, they're holding back the floodgates of the money that is available. And they're saying, you know what, we got to have some assurance, some long-term assurance that the tax regime is going to make sense for us long-term till we get our loan paid off. So what is it about our legislative action that's happening that speaks to the investors to give them the warm fuzzy that they can go ahead with the project? If all of the things make sense, they've got all of the agreements that they need, they've got all the preliminary agreements, right? You're not going to sign. Think about it. Somebody who's going to provide pipe is not going to sign and guarantee that they're going to go start building pipe if there's no investor there to pay them. So it all has to be preliminary until it's all ready to go into final sign on the dotted line, and now we all move together. But the hinge is this tax regime. And this boils down in this certain scenario, boils down to, and we're going to hear about this later, but boils down to the legislature's actions with regard to property taxes and the RCA's actions with regard to taxes at the local level or costs at the local level, not taxes, but costs at the local level. What is the RCA, the regulatory authority, going to agree to with regard to prices? Both of those are probably holding up the show at this point, or at least two things that are holding it up. I don't know. There might be more, but it makes sense to me out of everything that we've heard that those are two very big things that the money bags, the financiers, They're waiting to see what happens.
I just thought I'd make that point, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Stedman. Further comments? Senator Keel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Fulford, you've got a slide here about the things that go into decision gate 4, as I understand it. Is there a sequencing to these, or are these all running in parallel when you're at that point in the game?
Certainly, Senator Keel, through the chair, yeah, the sequencing is essential. So it's a flow through which the project becomes better and better defined. The engineering features of it get right down to significant degree of detail, to the point where you can discuss with EPC companies a budget and a time frame and a whole range of detail.
Senator Keel.
So for folks in our position trying to assess where things stand and how things are, some of these obviously have great visibility, right? Permits and regulatory stuff, there's public notices, we see that. Things like financing, the bankers doing the diligence they need to, are there ways that we can see into or get at least a distant view of where some of these other items are in the process?
Thank you, Senator Keel. And that's something that I'm sure Glenn Farn and AGDC could help you with.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Keel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think it'll be important to get an understanding of how close we are and where we are in the process in talking with them, so that we understand the level of urgency, the level of preparation.
Thank you, Senator Keel. Further questions? Senator Kaufman.
Thank you. There's a lot of great questions, a lot of great points, cost of capital and, community impact, all of these things. I'm just wondering if we could consider getting some sort of matrix of all of these concerns. There's a great deal of public interest in this process. I get emails pro and con. Some people, are characterizing this thing as a big trap. Other people are characterizing it as an opportunity that if we don't get it right and don't get it done here, that we're going to really impact the future of the state. I think potentially both are right. If we do it wrong, it won't be good. But if we do the right thing and we can figure it out and make it happen, it's a great thing. But I think it would be good. We have really limited time left. We have, I see about 20 days of effective time left in the special session, and we've got to methodically work through these things. I think we should be approaching it a bit more that way. And I know we've all done this, so we've got an idea in our head where we're going. But I mean, as a team, and also for the folks at home, we should, I feel, start each one of these committee hearings with kind of a dashboard of, hey, here's where we're at. Here's the critical things that we need to get sorted out. This is what we need to work on. This is the information we need. And then it's kind of a go or no go on each one of these things. If there's critical information we don't have and we can't make a decision, I think we need to make it apparent for the table, for the folks that are going to interface with us as subject matter experts coming in, of the pieces that we have, what we don't have.
He's basically telling the chair that we need to do a different process or modify our process of what the chair has decided to do. And he's probably questioning if Senator Hoffman doesn't really care that the pipeline gets built, then Senator Kaufman is trying to influence that decision by highlighting everything that needs to be done and then start eliminating the things. Because if you don't know what needs to be done, you don't know how to hold people accountable. So let's identify what needs to be done and then assign dates by which we think we need to have them done by. That way we can hold ourselves accountable, right? Somebody who doesn't want to see the pipeline go forward, it doesn't want to be held accountable to what we actually talk about. Dean's got a great point. Why do we care what the cost is as long as it's not Alaska's money? If Alaska's not an equity investor and Alaska's not putting money forward, somebody else is going to loan their money to get in the door to build this pipeline because they think they can make some money. We're going to get low cost gas and we're going to get some sort of tax revenue off of it. What do we care how much the project costs as long as it gets built? Why do we care? What is the legislative oversight necessity to second guess the project to death, to assess the project to death, to come to a conclusion that says, well, this is a good project or this is a bad project, or these factors are wrong or these factors are right. At the end of the day, it's not your project anymore. You are 25% owner of the project, and you are only that if you're going to take an equity position. So if you're not going to take an equity position, the only question you need to answer is, what are you going to do with your authority with regard to taxes? Does the cost of the project determine how much tax you're going to have? If that's the case, then that, to Senator Kaufman's point, needs to be the thing that's on the matrix, and you start whittling down the answers, addressing the questions to get to that answer. What is the right taxation piece for the cost of the project? If the cost of the project is what is going to be the determining factor of the size of your tax. If the cost of the project is kind of irrelevant to how much you're going to tax, then why focus on it? There's not from what we've seen, a better thing to talk about with regard to figuring out what the right tax is the cost of the gas going overseas. If we set a tax at one range or at one rate, or have a certain type of tax, what impact does it have to the price of gas? Remember the chart with the gradient? Whatever tax we set, where does it move the price to Japan? What is the price that we're going to sell? What does it do to that price? If it moves it outside of that profitability, that's what we care about. That's what the legislature should be caring about. The price of the project is irrelevant. As long as you're guaranteeing that you're not responsible for cost overruns, all of the things that your local communities are going to need to have taken care of during the construction phases are taken care of, and you're going to get the tax revenue that you agree to. That's what you need to know. All of the other stuff is it's interesting, but it isn't necessary to come to a conversation about taxation. What's the cost? And what is your actions as a legislature going to take to get you to that stage? Okay? Whatever it is that you want to sell the gas. Now, if the majority of the members at the committee don't want to see the pipeline built for one reason or the other, or genuinely don't care, okay, well then a way to not have responsibility, not have a bunch of angry Alaskans, is to just run out the clock. Look like you're busy, look like you're asking a bunch of good questions, look like you're doing your due diligence on the project, because that's what you're supposed to be doing as a legislature. You look at projects, except it's not your project. It's no longer your project. I don't even think you want to make it your project, because that would cost you money, and the legislature doesn't have that. You're not taking it out of the CBR. You're not taking it out of the ERA. You're not taking it out of any of the other accounts like the PCE account. So you're not, the legislature's not coughing up money to this project. It's not going to take an equity stake. I feel very confident that the majority of the legislature is not going to agree. They're going to say private industry needs to build it. And if that is the case, then it is no longer your project. You are just the taxing authority, and you need to answer the question, what is the right tax? That has less to do with the total cost of the project, and it has everything to do with price of what the end commodity is going to be sold at. Your actions have a direct result, and this is what we're being told. It's a game of nickels and pennies, maybe. Your actions have a direct result in what that cost is going to be to the purchaser. So let's focus on that. And we can save ourselves a whole lot of time. Great question, Dean. Dean's got another great question, although kind of a rabbit trail. Why do we need the RCA at all? Very good question. And off the top of my head, there's only one reason. NSTAR. NSTAR is a private company and it's a monopoly. The RCA also regulates your utilities, but the utilities are all co-ops in our state. They're the board of directors that makes decisions in the co-op are elected by the members that are paying the bills. So why do the members need another government agency to oversee the decisions they're making about themselves? If the cost of electricity goes up because of what the members agreed to or who they put in power, isn't that on the members? They made that decision. Why do they need the RCA to second guess what the members, representatives in the co-op decided to do? NSTAR is a private entity. It is not a cooperative. It is not owned and we don't control the board of directors. The Alaskans don't. So in my estimation, the only reason here that the RCA even has any relative purpose here is with regard to those type of companies. Maybe you can throw in the oil industry, or gas industry with regard to gas sales to NSTAR, but largely they're not overseeing the oil companies, just the decisions that are being made by NSTAR wanting to purchase gas from gas producers in Cook Inlet. So I agree with you. I don't know why. I don't know what value the RCA brings to this conversation. Outside of this pipeline, I don't know. With this pipeline, I think we need to consider removing the RCA from the equation. Good question. Yeah, James Kaufman can't come right out and say we're headed down the same path that Senate Resources is. We're asking a bunch of questions that don't really matter. Let's focus on the things that are really important, right?
And just tabulate it. And as we start the day, hey, this is what we're working on to get this critical information. And if we can get there, if we can be informed to make a good decision, then we'll be able to do that before the session's out. So I think the magnitude of this and the timeline that we're on, I think maybe it requires a structured and publicly clear process of what we're doing and where we're going with it. It's just I'm just trying to give a helpful suggestion on how to chew on this volume of data and the many questions that we have.
Thank you, Senator Kaufman. Further comments from Senate Finance members? Maybe we could talk a little later. Senator Kaufman, please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman.
You put an egg on my face, Senator Kaufman.
So one of the features which has been debated quite a bit over the last, several years really, is the time needed to move from, through the chart that I had on the previous slide. It would be true to say that where the economic case for a project is so compelling, it is possible to sort of circumvent or sidestep some of the features which we talked about in the last project. So in the last slide. So, for example, if you don't have a signed sale and purchase agreement, or if you aren't quite ready with your EPC estimates, if you have sufficient confidence that the project is going to be very accretive, then sometimes companies will take the plunge and move forward earlier. I've never seen this happen with an LNG project because typically, as I've said a couple of times, the hardest thing with these projects is to get to FID with everything lined up. So LNG projects, unfortunately, typically have to follow this very granular step-by-step process. But there's things that you can do to to ensure that journey is a smooth one. Obviously, as I say, for Alaska, a lot of the regulatory work, the FERC approvals, the export approvals, things like that, which can take quite a long time, they've already been done And so in that sense, the project is, as far ahead as it can be, really, given where we are. But as we've just been discussing, one of the, among the critical factors would be the capital cost and the EPC arrangements. And of course, another one would be what we're talking about today, which is the property tax, which, lenders, equity holders would be looking at in terms of what type of cost burden they might expect.
Question?
So previous in this meeting, which I knew we weren't going to have time to get to tonight, so I bypassed it. We'll have to come back to it. DOR will undoubtedly be in front of this committee, and we'll be able to kind of combine the conversations between the consultant and DOR on the actual bill and the tax regime that is being discussed here. But Nick Fulford gives some opinions or some history or perspective on other jurisdictions who use a volumetric tax as well. So the point here is the decision to move away from a property tax to a volumetric tax has a major impact on this project. And if this body, if this legislature, if finance committees are not interested in moving away from the current statute at some level, right? So it's a 20 mil tax, property tax now. We heard Stedman say earlier, or maybe it was when I was previewing, whether it's 20, whether it's 10, whether it's some other number, whatever the number of the property tax is, we're going to have to come to that decision point. If that's the direction we're headed, this body is headed, then that has implications to the project and the cost of the project, meaning the cost that the export cost of the goods to the buyer, to ourselves for the import or the in-state cost. It has an impact to that. If you eliminate the property tax and you go to a volumetric tax, that would have a more positive impact to the cost of the project, because you're taking out the risk of litigation going forward. That's one of the major components here that people are looking at, financiers are looking at, knowing that they're going to get sued in the future. So the risk that the property tax stays what it is on day one, that on day 1,000 it's still the same. It's likely not going to be. They know that because there's going to be lawsuits and there's going to be changes over time. So it adds risk and it adds uncertainty to the project. But moving to the volumetric tax would take that completely off the books. Then you would just have to have the conversation and have the faith that the legislature is not going to change the rate of the volumetric tax into the future. But that's a different conversation than the lawsuits that the legislature doesn't get to control. Those are whoever out there gets a wild hair and has standing and wants to sue, right? Totally different risk profiles or things that are going to get evaluated in the risk analysis. So again, these are the things the things that are affecting the FID are the things the committee needs to focus on. That's the real crux of the problem. How do you affect the price so that the project can move forward? Overall cost is largely not the concern. And this is what I was told 4 or 5 years ago. Before we had Glenfarne, the biggest hurdle that we had was finding somebody to come in and use their own $150 million to get through the front-end engineering and design. It was harder to find that $150 million. And we even had a conversation in the legislature about fronting the $150 million, or at least half of it, to incentivize somebody to come in so they wouldn't have to spend all their money. We didn't end up doing that. Glenfarne said, okay, we'll come in and we will do front-end engineering design. We'll pick up that tab. That money is harder to find because it's super high risk. What happens if they do the front-end engineering to design and they get to FID and they decide, you know what, this project is not economical, we're not going to go forward? Well, they just wasted $150 million. the $40 billion that gets spent to build the pipeline and the export facility, you've already gone through front-end engineering design. You've already gone through FID. You've already got all of your questions answered, and you're relatively sure that the program is going to go forward. Maybe the things that are concerning to you are things largely outside your control in politics and wars and things like that in the marketplace. What does the legislature do with regard to taxes down the road? Cost overruns. Those are all things that are some of that's manageable, some of it's not. But those are the things that you would already have assessments and paths forward with regard to the $40 billion, the $150 million, and identifying it as a viable project has already been done. The large dollar figures are out there. That's the easiest thing to come up with. That money is a whole lot easier to come up with than the $40 million the $150 million. Because there's lots of funds that are looking for long-term LNG projects that are stable and will provide a consistent and stable return because of the nature of the project. So this committee, finance committee, needs to focus on answering the question with regard to what's holding up FID. Their support in this is, what is the tax regime? What is the RCA going to do to hold up the project? How do we influence this situation? And I know that the legislature could just reach in and tell the RCA, you no longer have jurisdiction over this. Just remove that out, just preempt it and do what the legislature is going to do with regard to the project, what's best for the project, and leave the RCA out of it. You don't want to close up the RCA, fine. Just take this project out of the RCA's purview.
Seeing none, please proceed.
So perhaps picking up some of Senator Kaufman's comments, this idea of a decision support package, that is typically a very detailed, robust document, which would be typically prepared by the project developer and then shared with equity holders. And that would in turn typically go up to the board of directors of non-operating companies. They would review that. They would look at the risk assessment around it. And they would use that as a kind of a reference in terms of where things are. So this term decision support package is one that you'll see crop up quite a lot when projects come to FID. And I think in this context, it would be typical for the host government to certainly have some visibility into that decision support package, in the same way that equity partners would do. So, I'm sure this is something that Glenn Farn and AGDC can take you through in terms of where it's at, but it's a valuable document in terms of decision making. The other factor, coming back to the question of cost estimates, is kind of risk and how it's apportioned. And I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday. It's quite common, especially after the Australian experiences, it's quite common for LNG developers to push back on the EPC contractors in terms of cost caps and other cost mitigation exercises. With a project of this scale, we're talking billions of dollars. So the extent to which cost risk can be pushed onto an EPC contractor, I think, is limited, simply because many of these companies, large as they are, their balance sheets simply cannot support, a huge risk of that support. And then, of course, again, another feature that we've talked about is this question of transparency and engagement and involvement of all the key stakeholders. So these are the things that can assist with the FID and make sure that it's a smooth process. I did want to pause before we move on to the next section to consider.
Here's I think where we have a conversation about whether phase one can be built, and we have any assurance that phase two will be built. In other words, are we going to get stuck with high cost gas because phase one is the only thing they're going to build?
The phase one and phase two nature of the project that we have in front of us. So phase one of the project, as we know, is the building of the gas line. And as we approach FID for that, potentially independent of the rest of the project, it's worth reflecting on what FID would mean to the various stakeholders in the project. Perhaps the biggest group of stakeholders who through RCA tariffs and so forth might be ultimately the key to financing the pipeline is the energy ratepayers, both gas and electricity, in South Central and potentially Fairbanks and other parts of the interior. So effectively what phase one represents is a potential for very, very significant reductions in energy costs going forward. Whereas the phase one gas line, if it's apportioned across typical rate-paying customers, would represent a significant increase in energy costs. The phase two would represent a significant decrease, possibly less than half what they're paying today. So for South Central and interior ratepayers, the pipeline represents an option. It's by committing to a phase one supply, you're also being given an option on these, on potentially years of lower cost gas, but it's not definite. The same concept of an option value applies to Glenfarne and AGDC. I think based on things which have been shared in public, that there's a perception that once the gas pipeline goes to FID, the risks around the entire project decrease because one significant element of it is dealt with and becomes certain. So there's a very significant de-risking of the project. So one way of looking at that is that the opportunity to deploy a further 40 billion or more capital in terms of the liquefaction, the gas treatment, becomes a more certain outcome. So in terms of option value, FID on the pipeline has a kind of a financial or commercial value to AGDC and Glenfarne because it de-risks the rest of the project. So the other main stakeholder involved in that phase one gas line, of course, is the upstream producers. Now, they may only be providing, a few 100 million standard cubic feet per day of gas to South Central and Fairbanks. And in financial terms, it's probably broadly the equivalent of another fuel demand up on the slope. It's of similar order of magnitude. But of course, the big prize for them is the 3 BCF a day that they'd be selling to the LNG project. So, 3 BCF a day at $1.50 an MMBTU, that's about $1.5 billion a year in revenue. So for them, even though they're not necessarily present in the discussion around the phase one gas line, for them, FID on that gas pipeline brings that $1.5 billion per annum that little bit closer. So as you think more sort of holistically then about the phase one pipeline, you've got these three separate stakeholders. You've got customers, you've got Glenfarne and AGDC, and you've got the upstream producers, each of which gains quite significantly from the option represented by that pipeline. So the final thing to add is that, we were talking about the banks and the lenders and so forth, and, that pipeline would represent probably less than 10 billion but nevertheless several $1 billion of lending. And the thing that those lenders would probably look at and give most scrutiny to as they think about lending that money is the nature of that tariff. What does that tariff look like between the upstream producers and utilities like NSTAR or Chugach? And is that tariff robust enough to support debt service on that loan for 10, 20 years to come? So in that sense,
Sorry, not tax.
The determination that the RCA make and how that tariff is comprised and how long it lasts, that will be the foundation for any lending that happens on that pipeline if it's done separately from the LNG. So
what you're being told here, and I'm sorry I said tax with the tariff. I was mistaken. The tariff that he's referring to is the decision that RCA makes on what the acceptable price is that can be charged to the purchaser. So what can Glenfarne charge NSTAR for the rates? What can NSTAR charge the customer for the gas? Okay. That's the concern here, is that financing for the project is determined, or finance is contingent upon, let's put it that way, contingent upon the decisions at the state level with regard to your property taxes and this agreed upon price at the local level. So this is largely, I think, one of the major reasons why we haven't seen an FID yet, is because this is not, it is moving like molasses in trying to get to a solution that is going to be acceptable to, well, that a decision gets made in the first place, but one that is acceptable to your investors. So I think that's where we're at. Do we need to put the project in the hands of the RCA? Legitimate question. Why, if the legislature thinks that this is such an important project, why do we kick the can to the RCA? I don't think that's necessary. I think that it would be unwise to do that. I think the legislature should just preempt the RCA and identify what needs to be said and set it.
That tariff and the degree to which these other option features are looked at and whether or not they translate into financial support, that will all be looked at.
Question is like Senator Stedman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the Finance Committee wants to look at that. We know the rough volume in the rail belt that they consume, about 250. Maybe they go to 500. There's some estimates that they can get to 500. What is the debt service cost, semi-annual or annually, if you want to work annual numbers, annually, and where does that leave the project? Also with some numeric for operations, you got to pay the people to run the system. And what is the debt service coverage ratio? We should have that number on the table. And I think some of the other committees have used a number of about 12 billion for the in-state gas line, not 10. Mm-hmm. So that's, a significant increase right there. And then 20-year government bonds plus 3/8 is roughly 5.5 for your interest rate. We should be able to get a ballpark number of coverage, how much room that is. Do we need the Donelson mine up and going to make that debt service payment, which is a presentation we had here several weeks ago, and what other expansions need to take place in the rail belt to get from 250 to 500 on the consumption?
So here's where I would argue that the negotiation piece for the legislature with Glenfarne, Glenfarne's already announced that phase one can be profitable, right? And we've already reviewed the numbers to say if Glenfarne wants to be profitable and make their 10% interest, the prices at the volumes that we have the capacity to consume, and the price that we think is going to be price of gas from the North Slope, means that at 250 to 300 MCF, we're $20 or $30 an MCF to NSTAR or the utilities, right? So that's a huge increase in the price of gas for Alaskans. But that's with your 10% return based solely on the pipeline. Okay. If I am understanding the question correctly, Senator Stedman wants to know what the cost of servicing the loan is. What is the payment that needs to be made with regard to the $12 billion to make the pipeline, to build the pipeline, finance the pipeline? Okay. What does that cost? That's a number. Whatever the slides were showing us, that there's another number that includes a 10% profit. So if we're talking, if I understand what Stedman's asking, if we're talking about just making the minimum payments on the debt servicing for the pipeline, as opposed to making a payment that includes 10% profit on the pipeline, then those two numbers might be different. And I would assume that it would be less, right? Because you wouldn't have the profit factor in there. So if that's what he's getting at, then Glenfarne is put in a position where the legislature might not want to pay for the 10% profit, and they just want to be able to cover the cost of the loan until you get phase 2 built, because then phase 2 lowers the cost for us, and then Glenfarne gets to make the big profit. Don't make the profit off of us that increases the cost for the short period of time. And what would we be faced with? We'd be faced with a decision. People on fixed income would be pressuring their local utilities to please don't buy $30 gas. Import it for $16. Import it for whatever the importation cost is if it's less than 30. But then Glenfarne doesn't make their profit because they've got a gas that's not being purchased because it's too high. It's too expensive. Nobody wants it. So how do we manage this? Is that an RCA decision or is that a legislature decision? As much as I don't like or don't have faith in the legislature so much, I really don't have faith in the RCA. Not elected, appointed by the governor. I don't have faith that process is going to be in our best interest. I have a better feeling about the legislature being able to come to that conclusion. So as much as as much as that pains me to say, based on past performance, that's where I think the risk level lies. So how do we get the pipeline built for phase 1 that de-risks phase 2 and not have to have a period of time where we're paying $30 or $40 an MCF for gas because our throughput. So we've heard statements made in committee. Well, do we need to have another mine come on that increases the demand for the gas, the use of the gas, which increases the number of from 300 to 500, right? Then that drops the price. It's which lever do you want to move in order to help reduce that price? Senate Resources would say, well, we'll just put a price cap on it. You can't charge any more than $5 because that's what the governor said. Okay. Well, then if that's the case, do you even get a project? Do you even get an agreement made, right? Probably not. So there's got to be a solution here that they've got to come to grips with. If Alaskans don't want to get stuck with $30 or $40 MCF gas, then we got to have phase 2. So what is necessary to get to phase 2? It's time. You got a pipeline, and then it takes time to build the export facility. So you're looking at a couple of years of paying higher cost gas. Okay. What are our options? And I'm not positing any at this point in time, but I'm just saying I think the way that this is shaping up as the calculus of what needs to be done, what needs to be figured out. Okay. All right. I think that's, let me see. Do we got anything else?
So can we, Mr. Chairman, you have that, somebody cook those up if it's our consultant or if it's Department of Revenue, somebody should be putting those numbers in front of us.
We can have that debate after this meeting. I mean, discussion. Further questions, Senator Keel?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On exactly that topic, there's an ultimate cap on what that tariff can be, and it's imported LNG. Because the RCA is only ever going to approve what's reasonable and necessary. And if, the cost overrun example on slide 4 today were to hit an in-state 42-inch pipe with only in-state consumers, I worry that we have a half-built project and no chance of an approved tariff that could pay for the cost overruns. And then I think I have a guess as to where the money comes from. That's going to be a problem. So with the smaller volumes, I think, comes a much, much smaller pool of those who can take that risk. And I'm very concerned about the earnings reserve on the permanent fund at that point. Am I missing a big risk taker? Is there insurance you can buy for that?
Thank you, Senator Keel. And through the chair, well, perhaps the first part of your question around the cap being the the cost of imported LNG. Thinking back to one of the slides we looked at yesterday, looking at what that tariff would need to be for these smaller volumes of gas. Right there, you've got a number which is higher than the cost of imported LNG. So, so one of the questions, and I'm sure something that'll be deliberated over by the RCA, is how that price ceiling, call it what you will, using your terms, how that can be accommodated with a pipeline whose cost is that bit higher. And so as we look at this slide we have in front of us, you think, well, where might an additional financial contribution come from to either address risk or to bring the gas tariff to consumers down to a level that's comparable to imported LNG? There's a range of ways you could do that, but it would involve financial contributions from other than South Central customers and customers in Fairbanks. So I think one of the things it's worth looking at is how the RCA tariff setting mechanism is configured today, and whether there are other features which might need to be introduced to take in some of these broader, more strategic questions around tariff setting, which are unique to this phase 1 project, but typically probably not part of the usual RCA mandate.
Senator Keel?
I take it there's not insurance you can buy for that.
Thank you, Senator Keel. Further questions of the committee?
Okay, Dean, you're asking a question. You're shouting at me. So I think you probably need my attention. Dean asks, why do we care what the debt service is? It's not our debt to service. Okay. I'm going to take a stab at answering this question. I'm jumping back to the meeting from yesterday, and I'm bringing up the slide that talks about the cost in-state gas. Okay.
So what I've set out on this slide is...
Okay. So for illustration purposes here, these lines on the chart, the green and gray lines, represent the cost to service the debt to build the pipeline plus 10% return on investment. That's what they represent. This is the cost to us. And it is not $12 to the utility. It is $15. It is $20. It's $25. It's $30. And that's at 300 MCF throughput. If we're only 250 MCF, well, that number is up here somewhere. It's between 30 and 35 to the utility. Okay. So that's what this represents, is the cost of the pipeline plus 10% return on investment. That's why it matters what the debt service is, what the cost, if you have more debt, meaning the cost of the pipeline goes up, then there's more debt. And that means the payment, the minimum payment on that is larger. Well, that minimum payment is what is being represented here, because you got to start selling gas in order to make the minimum payment, or somebody has to make the minimum payment, right? That's what Nick was saying, is that look at what the RCA is what their mechanism is. If they can only set the rate at 12 or 16, and yet Glenfarne needs to make 30 in order to make the minimum payment plus 10%, then we have a problem, because you can't sell in-state gas at that point. The regulatory authority will not allow Instar to buy gas at 30, and that's what the pipeline project is going to sell it as. So the project never goes forward, because the RCA will not allow the economic conditions that is required. Lower the cost of the pipeline, then you don't have as big a, like this cost here, this cost to the rate pay, to the utility comes down, right? The bottom gray line or the bottom dark green line represent the lowest cost of the pipeline, 10 billion. Those numbers would continue to fall, or the lines would continue to fall on this chart if the cost of the pipeline was less than 10 billion. Just like they rise if it's more than 10 billion. So that's the point with regard to the cost of the debt to services, because that's your minimum payment that you and I are paying for plus return on investment for the pipeline that we are asked Glenfarne to make. It's why it's not likely in our best interest to just have a pipeline that services in-state, not this pipeline. Maybe the cost is less for a smaller diameter pipeline if you're just doing in-state. But for a 42-inch pipeline, right? That's what this chart says. A 42-inch pipeline, it's going to cost us way more for just in-state. It's why it's not economical for just in-state, not at the prices that we would be charged. You got to have phase two. So it's a sticky wicket, as we say in the military. It's a sticky wicket that needs to be figured out here. How do you get phase one complete if the cost for the gas is going to be prohibitively expensive to us and we don't want to pay it, and the RCA is not going to allow it? Okay, well then phase one never happens, and then phase two never happens, and the project doesn't happen. So there's got to be a way forward here if we want the project to happen. Frank asks, what's the cost to the state? Who is going to make up the cost difference between the gas line, wages, and state? What? I don't understand, Frank. I have not received your email, but I don't understand why you're on the kick on state wages. I don't get it. What does that have to do with the project? I get that you might be concerned about the wages of state workers, but why hijack a conversation about the pipeline? That's the connection that I don't understand. So help me understand why we should be concerned about state wages with regard to a gas pipeline built by a private individual or private corporation. Okay. Okay. Let's stop there. We've covered a lot. There's a lot to digest and a lot to think about. And we're at the 2-hour mark. And honestly, I'm a little frazzled right at the moment. Lots to think about. I think the big takeaway today is recognizing that the conversations that really need to be had at the legislature, in the Senate Finance Committee right now, in both of the finance committees, is how do you find a tax and regulatory structure that's property tax and RCA decision? How do you find that makes the end cost of the product something that is palatable to all of the consumers. That's in-state rates and rates outside. It appears that the rates outside are far easier to address, right? The $10 average is a far easier thing to figure out or to reach than the in-state rate, which looks like what we were just looking at is $30, somewhere between $15 and $30, which is double what we're paying now. Even if it's for a short period of time, how do you overcome that? Is that a point where the legislature says, okay, well, then I guess we're going to subsidize, hate to use the word, but just throwing the concept out, we're going to subsidize the cost of gas between the period of first gas flowing in the pipeline and first gas flowing out of the export facility. That way we reduce the cost of gas for in-state users. Somebody's going to pay. You're going to pay if you buy the gas, or you're going to pay by losing your dividend. One of the two, right? If you want the project. If you Giesel the project and you put a price cap on it and say you can't charge any more than $5, then you don't have a project. It doesn't go forward at that point. Frank, the people that are plowing my roads now are going to plow my roads while there's a conversation about building a pipeline. When they're building the pipeline, those people are going to plow the roads. If they don't, if they all quit, then the legislature will figure it out and they'll pay them more. I don't understand why you're asking a question now. It is a easy question to answer. Quit your job. We don't have plow truck drivers. We will hire new plow truck drivers. And if we have to pay them more, then we'll do that. I don't understand. Anyway, send me an email. I still haven't received it. Okay. No show tomorrow. My youngest daughter has a dance recital, and that is where my place of duty is. So we will be there watching the dance recital. We will pick this up on Monday. We'll catch up with what happened on Friday. I haven't looked to see if there's meetings scheduled on Saturday, but if there are, we'll incorporate them in. Anyway, I will see you again Monday. Guess I should check my schedule. I didn't look on Monday's schedule really quickly. Yeah, Monday's good. So I will be I will be back with you on Monday. And hope you have a good weekend. I think that the weather is supposed to hold for South Central Alaska and at least have a little bit more of this somewhat springy early summer weather. So go out and enjoy it. Okay. Have a good weekend. We will see you Monday. Adios.